Hi, Tim.
Hi, Matt. How you doing?
I am doing great, and for those of you at home watching, you may have noticed that Bill Scher is not with us. He is on assignment. Filling in for him is Tim Fernholz, a writer with the American Prospect magazine. Thank you for joining us, Tim.
It's great to be here, replacing the inimitable Bill Scher.
That is right. Well, I guess the big news this week, at least the last couple days, has been healthcare. And as everyone knows, Harry Reid had a big press conference the other day where he announced that he would push for the opt-out version of the public option. And then the next day, we had Joe Lieberman once again becoming the object of scorn in the liberal blogosphere for saying he would support a Republican filibuster to prevent the 60 votes necessary for this public option. And Tim, what's your take on this, and what are you hearing from the liberal blogosphere?
Sure. Well, I think intemperate reaction is right. I myself wrote a really rather angry, shrill, if you will, post about Mr. Lieberman's decision the other day. But look, I think there are two reasons that people are angry about this, and one is that his excuse for saying he would filibuster a public option bill is because it would raise taxes and affect the national debt. But the independent CBO says that it's going to actually make healthcare cheaper. So I think what really galled a lot of people was just sort of the brazenly saying things that really aren't true. But ultimately, I think a lot of bloggers had pretty smart takes on this, people like Ezra Klein and John Shea, who basically said, look, this is sort of what Lieberman does. He's going to come out here and try and get some attention and try and get some control over the final bill. But they think he's going to be less of a problem going forward than people like Ben Nelson, or other more centrist senators than even Lieberman, who are more inclined to try and kill this bill with the Republicans. So we'll see. But it has raised cries that the Democrats should adopt a Republican-style approach to seniority in the Senate, where the Republicans sort of decide who's going to be the chairman of what committees, rather than doing it on seniority, which is more or less how the Democrats do it.
Well, conservatives are, not surprisingly, I guess, having Joe Mentum fever. And I've got a couple smart posts. Michael Goldfarb, who coined the term, at least in this debate, Joe Mentum, 2012, is he the greatest senator ever? He fought for victory in Iraq. He's fighting for victory in Afghanistan. And he's fighting to save us all from Obamacare. Who needs Olympia Snowe when you've got Joe Mentum? That's Michael Goldfarb at the Weekly Standard. Red State's Eric Erickson writes, thank you lefty bloggers so much for primarying Joe Lieberman and helping him be bold enough to shaft you. And over at National Review, Rich Lowry writes, maybe Democrats can try to purge Lieberman in a hateful campaign of vituperation. Oh yeah, they've already tried that. So I guess one question is this the Joe Lieberman that Democrats have always hated or liberals have always hated? Or has he, in a sense, is this a monster that liberals created when they primaried him, when they ran Ned Lamont against him?
Well, I think Erickson sort of delivers a backhanded compliment there, because if Lieberman is really doing this in a fit of pique, angry at the left for what they did to him in that campaign, then he really doesn't have any principles at all. So that's I would like to think that is not why Lieberman is doing this. I mean, look, I think John McCain sort of pioneered this tradition as a senator who sort of gets involved at the last minute in negotiations that they don't have much to do with, seizing the middle ground in an attempt to get attention, raise campaign funds, and, increase their power as senators. And it's traditional and it's typical, and Joe Lieberman has done it on a lot of issues. I think it does represent a shift to the right for him, because, the saying that's been much mocked on the internet these days was that, Lieberman is with us on everything but the war from the left perspective. But of late, he's not even been with us on, say, healthcare or economics. So I don't know. I would put the odds of him actually supporting a filibuster much less than other people, like Mr. Nelson or Blanche Lincoln, maybe, people like that.
Really? So you think that Lieberman, when push comes to shove, would not support the filibuster?
I'm sorry, who? Oh, with Lieberman? I don't know. I mean, I think Harry Reid will be able to buy him off. I think Lieberman wants a little attention, And, you know, I could be wrong. Maybe Lieberman's going to take a stand on this. But the thing is that people should know is Lieberman supported the public option in 2004 in his primary campaign running for president. He said that people should be able to buy into a Medicare or Medicaid-like public insurance plan that would provide competition to the insurance industry. That's what he said in 2004. Apparently now, that's, you know, a terrible thing, but I think we've seen Joe Lieberman, like his buddy John McCain, be willing to stake their flag where they have to get, you know, what they want. So I think...
And McCain, as you know, McCain has angered conservatives time and again by doing this sort of thing to them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason they get along so well. We saw that last summer in the campaign.
So let me ask you this. Now, do you believe that Harry Reid... Because I think there's several schools of thought, but the two primary schools of thought, one says that Harry Reid really believes he can get the public option, and that's why he did this. The other theory says he's under pressure from the liberal bloggers because he's in the unions and he's in a tough election, and so he has to throw them a bone, and they're going to see that he tried and that there aren't the votes there, and then they will settle for something less. So I guess my question is, do you think that Lieberman is sincere and has a real shot of getting this passed, or do you think that this was an effort to throw the liberals who want a public option a bone and make them more amenable to settling for half a loaf?
Well...
And I know I'm mixing metaphors, but...
Yeah, there's a lot going on in this political calculus, and you touched on a number of things. I think liberals in the Senate, there is a significant block of liberal senators who want a chance to vote on a public option. And I think at some point that was going to have to happen, and I guess Reid thinks it should be now. And I think they would have been very angry, and it would have caused him problems in the caucus if he hadn't let that happen. Two, I mean, yeah, he does have a race to run. He does need labor support. I don't think Reid is particularly concerned what liberal bloggers think of him. Liberal bloggers don't really like Harry Reid very much and have never made, any secret of that. And they, I don't think he really cares what they think, and they don't really care what he thinks. They would just like him to pass a strong health care bill.
But they had a lot of good things to say about him yesterday or the other day. I know this might.
Well, yeah, sure. You want to take yes for an answer. You know, if you've been saying that Harry Reid needs to pass a bill with a public option, that he says he's going to do that. I mean, you ought to say good for him. But we'll see, if he has the votes to do it. I think ultimately, I used to be very skeptical that there would be a public option in the final health reform bill, but I think the momentum is there now, especially, in the House, and if Harry Reid's putting in this bill. The other thing to keep in mind is, Democratic senators are going to talk about joining this filibuster, but are they really going to be the one Democrat to stop their party from passing a health care bill this year? I think the peer pressure there within their caucus is going to be very hard to get around.
But, and we're going to get to elections next, but elections are coming up, and we're going to see Republicans winning in Virginia, a state that Barack Obama won last time. There's a tough race in New Jersey. I think the Democrat Corzine will win, but it's a close race in a very blue state. And you've got these blue dog Democrats like Mary Landrieu, Blanche Lincoln, Ben Nelson, and some of them may not be up for a few years. Like I think Landrieu's not up for several years. But are they really going to want to go back to their conservative district and say that they supported the public option and that's why we...
Heck yeah, they are. Heck yeah, they are. If you look at the polling, and Blanche, I forget which state, it's either Blanche Lincoln or Mary Landrieu, the public option polls very well. People like it. And the fact of the matter is that the elections that are going on this year, and particularly the two governor's races that you mentioned, are running on whole different dynamics. Because you have this economic problem, you have states that have been ruled by Democrats for a decade in the case of Virginia, and I think similarly long in New Jersey, where there's, local things where, people are having problems with the economy and they blame the governor, rightly or wrongly for that. That's going to be very different, I think, when these centrist senators are up for re-election. And the other thing is it's totally disingenuous if they are going to say, if people are concerned about the deficit, which is what these centrists claim to be, deficit hawks, fiscally responsible, the public option is fiscally responsible. It saves money. And if they're going to go back and try and tell their constituents that they voted against something that was going to bring down the deficit because it was going to bring up the deficit, I think they're going to have a hard time making that. A lot of the time, I think these centrist senators get their donors confused with their constituents.
If you ask people do you support a public option, they will say yes. If you ask people, do you support another $1 trillion to the deficit? Do you support $500 billion in taxes? Do you
Which
support
are not going to
premiums
happen
going
as
up?
part of this bill.
They would say no, and that's what's going to happen if there's a public option. We're not going to agree, so. But
well, you don't need the CBO report for any of this legislation that says it's going to add $1 trillion to the deficit. I think you'll have a hard time finding one.
Well, I think we're waiting for the CBO report, which brings up another point, is it's impossible to really score something when you don't know what states, in this case, would opt out. But anyway.
That's fair, but I think you would say, look, you would score it as though they all opted in, because presumably your argument would be if they opted out, it would be cheaper. Is that somehow right?
I think that's part of it, and part of the other problem, and part of the problem with the opt out is that you have to pay taxes, the same high taxes, regardless of whether or not you opt in. But
the public option doesn't really have anything to do with taxes. It's not going to be paid for by taxes. It's not an entitlement. Joe Lieberman said it was an entitlement. It's not. It's something that will be paid for by premiums. So I don't know. I mean, look, there are parts of this bill that are going to cost money, and there are going to be things, whether it's the excise tax on health insurance, or if the House plan goes through, the surtax on millionaires. There are going to be taxes on some people for this, but it's not even related to the public option. It's an entirely separate debate. And that's the other thing that's been really interesting is, we just spent 10 minutes talking about the public option. It is a very small part of a very large plan with a lot of other stuff going on. That's all very important and I think useful. I think we would certainly find grounds to disagree. But it is funny how the public option has sort of captivated everybody in this debate.
I think it's entirely predictable because fundamentally, that's what conservatives are most afraid of, and fundamentally that's what liberals most want. I personally think that we're going to end up with, not that I want it, but I think we're going to end up with either some sort of a trigger or an opt-in instead of an opt-out. I do not think that Harry Reid has the votes, and I also wonder about giving Olympia Snowe the shaft. She went out on a limb to support getting this out of the Senate Finance Committee.
Not with her constituents, not in Maine. People who voted her into office think it's great. The Mainers who voted her into office think it's great. She may have gone out on a limb with the rest of her caucus, but she doesn't answer to them. She answers to the folks back in Maine. And they like the public option.
She went against her entire party and every other Republican senator to side with the Democrats, and then they changed the bill on her after she went out on a limb for them.
They didn't change the bill on her. She doesn't have to vote yes on the next one. She voted yes on something that was in front of her, and now there's going to be a process where the Finance Committee bill is going to be merged with the Health Committee bill, and things are going to change. And if Olympia Snowe doesn't like it, as she said at the committee when she voted on it, she said, if it doesn't stay this way, I'm not going to vote on it. So I don't think they gave her the shaft. I think they said, well, Olympia, you have your position and we have ours.
And that's their right to do. I'm just wondering, is it smart politics? Because
I don't think the White House thinks so. I think the White House thinks you're probably right. I don't think they were super happy.
As long as you could argue that there was one Republican supporting it, that provided cover for all the other Blue Dog Democrats. They could say,
well, I think the one lesson there is one Republican doesn't provide cover. Because I think we saw with the stimulus bill where you had two Republican, one almost a Democrat senators voted for the stimulus bill. And that was supposed to provide cover, but those same senators were happy to demagogue against it in any case. So I think the one thing that the stimulus taught us is that 3 Republican votes does not cover for anything, And
I disagree.
The Democrats ought to make a policy and stick with it and campaign on that.
Well, part of it is public perception. Part of it is how the media spins it. Does the media portray it as bipartisan or partisan? And part of it, frankly, I think, is how will history judge it? Looking back, I think that something that has broad bipartisan support is much less likely to be turned back in the future, as opposed to something that was rammed through by a complete party line vote. So
I don't know. I think if you look at the New Deal, for instance, or even a great one is the vote to expand the Army before World War II, keep the draft going. FDR's presidency won by one vote. I think the United States has a great history of ramming through majority party legislation that sits for a long time. If it's unpopular, it's not going to. One thing, people love talking about the catastrophic Medicare program in the late 80s where they passed this healthcare reform that was supposed to help people, and there was a huge backlash and repealed it the immediate year. That's not a scenario that's out of the question. But honestly, I don't think people really care how the votes went. They care if the program works or not.
So on Tuesday, we have some elections coming up. And you would think we would be talking about Virginia and New Jersey, the two gubernatorial elections, and we are, but by and large, at least the conservative blogosphere, I would say, has been obsessed with New York 23. We've talked about this. We've talked about this before here on Blogging Heads on the Weekend Blog, where you've got three candidates running: a Democrat, a liberal Republican, and you've got a conservative candidate named Doug Hoffman, who's part of the Conservative Party of New York. And this week, conservative bloggers Michelle Malkin and Phil Klein with American Spectator have been criticizing Newt Gingrich, who endorsed the liberal Republican, Didi Scozafava, in the race, Eric Erickson at Red State, Ed Morrissey at Hot Air. They've been promoting Fred Thompson's new TV ad for the conservative candidate. Endorsements have been pouring in for this conservative candidate: Sarah Palin, Tim Pawlenty, and most recently, Jim DeMint. So,
yeah, I think it's one of those things
any
where the party out of power sees a chance to define itself. And I think you saw it maybe if you look back to the Paul Hackett race in Ohio, that special election in 2005 for the Democrats. There is a debate right now going on within the Republican Party over what kind of party they need to be in order to get majority and pass the policies they want. And this is sort of, a fire test here. And to me, to my view, and, take it as you will as a liberal, but I think Newt Gingrich is right. And I think the one lesson liberals learned in 2006 and 2008 is that we really have to tolerate Democrats who aren't as far to the left as we'd like them to be if you want to be a majority party. And I think that's what Newt Gingrich is trying to say.
But you guys spent 2003 through 2008 going against the DLCers, and I think that this sort of campaign, as you mentioned, is very consistent with what Marcos Militzis and other liberals were pushing.
Well, no, that's the thing, because that's a common misconception. Like, Marcos Militzis didn't really care that much how left someone was. They wanted them to be partisan. They wanted them to have a stand for some principles. The DLC, at least popularly conceived on the left, was that, they just sort of were Republican light. But they wanted people who were full-throated Democrats. You never saw, a lot of complaints, and I'm not necessarily talking about the netroots here, although I think Marcos is very pragmatic. I'm talking about the party committees that actually, got these majorities going. And there's a lot of complex interplay. It's not like there's one factor or another. But I think on the whole, the Democrats have tolerated people like Heath Shuler, if you want to give an example, Bobby Bright in Alabama, seats all over the South, and the West, the mountain states.
Will you be okay with them if they vote against a public option? Will liberals run primaries against them if they decide to vote against the public option?
I really think it depends on their district. Sometimes you have people who are saying, my district doesn't support this, and sometimes they have pretty good evidence for that.
Blanche Lincoln
sometimes they don't
in Arkansas.
But I think if you look at this race right here, the Republican primary, you have Didi Scozafava, who was chosen by the local parties, was an elected representative there. Yeah, she's a little more liberal, but so was John McHugh, the previous incumbent of the seat. John McHugh endorsed EFCA while he was in the House. He was one of two Republicans to do it, but I bet John Boehner wishes he had his vote right now. And Joe Hoffman doesn't even live in the district. And you have these people, like Sarah Palin, like Rush Limbaugh, who don't hold elective office, who are coming in and trying to support this guy, and, good for them, and maybe that'll work out, but I think they just handed the Democrats another vote, which...
Maybe. You're making a pragmatic case, and there's certainly a lot of smart people who, including Newt Gingrich, who I'm guessing you disagree with on a lot, who take that stance. But, in all honesty, I do recall in the 2000s, the netroots sort of railing against this go-along-to-get-along mentality, the insider DC types. The
Joe Lieberman is a great example of this. They were railing against someone like Joe Lieberman because he came from a blue state, a very liberal state, but wasn't voting liberally. So, you give Joe Lieberman a primary, but maybe you don't primary,
but New York 23 is a pretty conservative district. I think it's way more conservative than Didi Scozafava. I think Doug Hoffman would.
But
it's not like he's running for a governor of New York.
Who do you want? I mean, I guess if conservatives, I think, have a choice in that district, imagine if all of the money that went to Hoffman went to Skazafava. I think she would cream Mr. Owens, the Democratic candidate. But
I mean, now you're probably true.
Now you're going to have Mr. Owens in that seat for 18 months.
Is that your prediction? Do you predict Owens is going to win?
Yeah, I will. And in fact, here's my slate for the election on Tuesday. I think that Creed is going to lose in Virginia. I think Corzine will win in New Jersey. I think Owens will win in New York 23, and I think Maine will reject the repeal of gay marriage. I think that's going to be rejected. So I think 3 out of 4 ain't bad for the liberals, but we will see. There's time left.
I think you're
what's
right.
interesting,
I think you're
and the
right
other
about
thing, I'll say this quick, and then you go, is Bob McDonnell, the Virginia gubernatorial candidate for the Republicans, is running on centrist jobs. He's not running as a teabagger. He's not running to the right. He's running as a centrist, and he's going to win, I think, because of that, especially because he didn't get into the mix on this thesis thing that Creed Dietz promoted. He sort of stepped aside and focused entirely on the economy, and I think that was very smart. He ran a good campaign. I think that's why he won, or he will win.
No, I mean, I think that's he ran a good campaign, and I think that talking about the economy and transportation and all that is consistent with being a conservative. And you're right, he didn't wade into the culture wars, but I don't think he needed to. I don't think it was that's not what this election's about. But look, it's not just Bob McDonnell. Republicans are going to sweep Virginia. There's the Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor. Republicans are going to win there too. And New Jersey is a lot closer than it should be in the sense that it's such a blue state. So it will be an interesting year. And whether fair or not, Barack Obama, there will be stories written, because this is how, you're a writer just like I am. There will be stories written that says, is this a trend? What does this say about Barack Obama? So it could have an impact. And by the way, in 1994,
here it comes.
most of the candidates who won in 1994 were recruited after the elections of 93 when George Allen and Christy Todd Whitman won. So it can have a real impact and actually consequences. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, I think you're right, the stories will be written. I think it will be hard to draw national conclusions from these races, but I think if they do embolden, Republican candidates, because recruiting is half the battle for these committees, and if they can get some good candidates, it's going to be harder for the Democrats in 2010. But I don't think we're going to see a 1994 style scenario in 2010. Although I'm sure a lot of people were saying that this time in 1993 too.
We shall see. Well, Tim Fernholz, thank you for joining us. And do you have anything you want to plug? Twitter feed? Anything you've written recently you want to give a plug to?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, follow me on Twitter. It's Tim Fernholz, and in our November issue of the American Prospect, I have an article on Too Big to Fail, which I think is pretty good. You should check it out.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim, for joining us and filling in ably for Bill Scher, who is on assignment, which is a fancy way of saying we don't know where he is and he may be on vacation.
Thanks a lot for having me, Matt. It's been great.
Thank you, and we'll have to do this again, and we'll see how our predictions go.
We'll have to do a follow-up next week if Bill is still on assignment.
To be continued. Bye-bye.
Bye.